Welcome to Hacking the Hustle. This is your host, Benjamin Sklar, and I'm very excited to have Aya Allison on the podcast today. How are you doing, Aya?
No, I'm doing great. So grateful to be here. Thanks.
Amazing. For those listening, Aya is the CEO of Sunset Biosciences, which is a wellness lab and a education consulting firm regarding microdosing and psilocybin usage. So I'm really excited to have her on Hacking the Hustle today to talk about this new emerging trend going on in Silicon Valley and around the country, around the world, for people who are looking to grow mentally and physically. So let's kick it off, Aya. Please start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what's your background.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I have a background that's fairly varied. However, more than anything, it's very holistic. So I looked at holistic things in a holistic way, my whole life. And so I have studied esoteric knowledge. I have studied traditional Chinese medicine. I've also studied neuromuscular therapy, French, a lot of different things. But what I found that helped me the most in my life as I was dealing with many of my own personal issues is I got involved with entheogens, or plant medicine, or as a lot of people would say, psychedelics. So I've been involved with that community on and off for about the last decade. And I've also been working as a coach. So with those two fields sort of beginning to emerge, I had so many clients that were asking me all these questions around microdosing and what is it. And so it began this emergence of creating the wellness lab, and also doing a lot of very, very, very deep research.
Incredible. Tell us how you found psilocybin and why do you think people need to learn more about it?
When trends come up, there's going to be tons of misinformation. There's going to be tons of stigma. And psilocybin is one of those things that, as a Schedule I drug, right, as it's called, has a ton of stigma around it. But then also there's this idea that, oh, well, it's this magic bullet, and that if I can get my hands on it, it's going to solve everything. As an educator and a researcher, my goal is to remove stigma and to provide great information. Because the thing is, you can have it framed in a certain way in this, whether it's this hopeful or romanticized view. But at the end of the day, we really need research. We need a lot of education, get into the hands of people, because when we have these ideas about what something can do versus what it actually does, that's where you might get a little lag in terms of, sort of like general perception. Also what it, just again with the stigma, if you think, oh, this is going to happen to me, I'm going to lose my mind, I'm going to do these things. The goal here is to understand, there's different amounts of this and there's different things that it does. So, it's really important. I think of it like this, it's like you get in a car, it doesn't mean it's a race car that's going to go, 200 miles per hour. There's all sorts of different vehicles. So if you think of it as a vehicle, it can do a lot of different things. It's not necessarily going to take you to the moon all the time.
I love that. I read the Wikipedia about psilocybin before our call, and it said the adverse reactions to psilocybin are nausea and panic attacks, which I thought were relatively mild.
If you've had a panic attack before, it can seem like a lot. However, death is not typically one of the side effects, except ego death. And that, at the end of the day, is what I think so many of us are afraid of. It's just like, well, but that's everything that I know. And what if it gets destroyed? Well, if you think of the Shiva statue that's outside of MIT, Shiva is standing on the back of ego. And so with this, it's like, if we think of psilocybin as our jetpack, we can kind of fly up and put our foot on our ego and do it in a way where it's much more manageable. So yeah, I mean, if you, get some high anxiety and nausea from it, if that's the price of entry, then I say, kudos to the people who are willing to take that step.
I have never heard the phrase ego death before. Can you please break that down for me?
Sure. Ego death is you think, if you think of the ego as almost the, this invisible prison around us, it's everything that we know, it's what we've built ourselves up to be. And it's this, it's the constant everyday, who we wake up and we reaffirm who we are. It's our thought patterns. It's all of these things. And it's what we hold on to in saying, like, this is who I am. This is everything, that I can be. It gives us this container, in a way, this thought container, I would say, of our potential. And it's great, but it's also very limiting, because when your ego is telling you, like, oh, I don't want to have nausea or a panic attack, because why would I do that? How is it going to be helpful for me to take this step outside of this little cage that I've created for myself? And for those, again, who are willing to kind of, be the observer and look at the situation, you really can start to notice, like, well, wait a second, if I just allow myself to sort of step outside of this identity that I've created, then maybe there's actually so much more. I think someone explained it as, like, we are sort of like the prisoner and the warden. We're sitting inside of this ego or this cage, but at the same time, at any time, we can let ourselves out by, kind of agreeing to say, maybe this thing that I've been thinking my whole life, maybe there's another way to see it. And so the beauty of psychedelics is it gives us this opportunity to use this completely different neural network within our brain. So it's not like psilocybin is giving you something that you don't already have. It's kind of, if you think of it as like dusting off the connections in between these neural networks that aren't always used. If you do a workout and you feel like, oh, I really feel that muscle. Psilocybin is very similar, and a lot of the plant medicines are, where it kind of like, oh, it kind of makes you work out these other perspectives. And then it allows you to look at yourself and sort of this ego that you've had around yourself, this idealized version of yourself. You start to see where it can actually expand and change and grow.
Wow. That was amazing. Tell me about the legal framework. Where are we right now in the United States regarding psilocybin?
That is a great question, and that is always changing. So with the decriminalized movement, there are many cities in the U.S. that have decriminalized many, actually, of the entheogens, which would include things like ayahuasca, psilocybin. There's several on that list. So decriminalization doesn't mean legalization. And for some people, they would say decriminalization is actually much more optimal in some ways, because it keeps the states from putting all of these bureaucratic, inhibitors in place that actually can lead it. For example, in California, with the cannabis movement and what goes on with cannabis there, it's actually really been detrimental for many business owners. So decriminalization, well, yes, on a federal level, it doesn't mean that it is legal. Decriminalizing, these substances means that there's a jurisdiction, there's an agreement sort of like within a city. For example, Oakland has decriminalized, Santa Cruz has decriminalized, Detroit actually recently decriminalized, Ann Arbor, DC. These are all places that have decriminalized. So it means it's lowest priority in terms of criminal prosecution. So while it doesn't mean that it's legal, it does mean that there's a tendency to lessen the priority of going after people who are either caught with the substances or are maybe using them in a little more of a public way.
Understood. So, for example, Washington, D.C. has decriminalized psilocybin, but it's still federally a Schedule I drug in line with crystal meth.
That's correct. And isn't that, what do you think about that when you see, here's psilocybin, here's meth, GHB, here's the heroin, Schedule I, right? We're talking about drugs. And then we're talking about something that's going to cause ego death. Wow, people are really scared of ego death, huh?
Why do you think legislators are afraid of changing the law, or they haven't yet?
Well, there is something called cost sunk bias, and bias over time where you have put you've invested tons of energy into an idea. So with the Fed, they've said, hey, we said this was a drug. What, you think that we're going to change our mind now? So there's a real hesitancy on the part of big government to kind of go against what they've stated as true. I mean, there has to be a mountain of evidence to the contrary for them to really change their minds. And it's a slow moving machine. But at the end of the day, with that, I'm less concerned about the Fed. I'm more interested in, let's just say, if more people in the general population have access and have education, and everybody kind of, rushes into the space, it's like, what are you going to do? The genie's out of the bottle. I mean, it's kind of the way we think about, other new technologies that are emerging, like cryptocurrency, where it's like, once the genie's out, the Fed's going to have to deal with it. So I feel very similar about things like psilocybin, where it's like, okay, Michael Pollan is writing books about this. I mean, it's a very hot topic. I mean, you want to go to, Forbes, Business Examiner, you can go to any type of mainstream outlets for information, and I feel like recently psilocybin psychedelics was on the cover of Vogue.
Wow.
So it's out of the bottle, and the Feds at some point are just kind of have to deal with it.
Makes me think of cannabis and how it's a similar narrative. And when you said the sunk cost fallacy or whatever you said, I learned that principle in law school. There was a lot of people who, when they were in their second or third year in law school, were considering quitting, but they didn't want to because they already invested so much effort and time and money into it. And it was the sunk cost fallacy of like, all right, you've invested 2 years, let's do another 20 years because you invested 2. And it's a fallacy. It doesn't make any sense if you think about it. I guess that's how the government has been applying to it for some time.
People do it all the time. Look, and that's the thing. And there's no judgment on my part from that, but it's just understanding emotion versus logic. So there's obviously no logic in it, but as people, as humans, we are wired for that bias, and it's cost sunk bias, right? So, oh, I've invested all this time, I might as well keep doing that. But I would say to you, I mean, okay, just because you've been on a sinking boat doesn't mean you have to go down with it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's look at the outcome versus sort of what you've put in versus outcomes. Mm-hmm. And this is just a perspective shift. And that's the beauty of things around, like the psychedelics. So in terms of perspective shift, what I think is going to be happening is the general population is shifting their perspective, and there's not going to be anything the Fed can do about it. Too many people are deciding this is something that I need access to, information around, and again, that's why the education is so important.
Makes me think of COVID-19 and boosters, and when is the American public going to have enough when they start mandating boosters? How many boosters are we going to get until we say enough?
Absolutely. And we could take this conversation a lot of different directions, but I would just say, absolutely, it's the general population being able to say, okay, is this really effective? Is this really helping me? Okay, so it's acceptable that I bought this and then I got COVID, or I didn't get it and then I got COVID, and then it means two different things. And I think it's just, when sort of issue after issue after issue keeps coming up, and then there's so much of it piled up in front of you, I think it becomes much more difficult to ignore. So in terms of things around, the psychedelics, it's like, wait a second, why is this illegal? Why is this a Schedule 1? Why is this as dangerous as heroin? And it's just, I think when we see, influencer after influencer or public persona, saying like, oh, wow, this really changed my life, I really do feel like you have people that are kind of waking up and saying like, wait a second, this person is saying this, I'm reflecting on that. I trust what this person says. The narrative will begin to shift. And again, it's just, that's why I feel like getting the information out there is so important.
Right. I imagine there's millions of Americans who take antidepressants every day. How could psilocybin replace that?
So, with this being, one, I am not a scientist, and two, I don't want to advocate one way or the other, even though I have very strong opinions on this. I will just say it's been interesting doing surveys with populations of people who have I acknowledged microdosing psilocybin and being on SSRIs and antidepressants. And it's been fascinating to collect this data and see all of the people who have been able to safely get off of their meds over a period of time by self-administering these microdoses. And what I've seen in collecting this data and research, and I've actually presented on this topic at a psychedelic conference earlier this year, instead of going through the brain shocks and these, panic attacks and these, terrible, really, I mean, we're talking about weaning off of drugs that people can typically experience when they are getting off of, when they've decided to go off their meds. And again, that's a reason why a lot of people don't go off of their meds. They're terrified. They've heard the stories of what happens when people go off their meds. But what people have been able to do while using a microdose, it's been unbelievable, where there's none of the side effects. They're not slipping into some, space where they were years before, and that their life is back to, topsy-turvy. They're actually transitioning smoothly into a very normal state, because a lot of people realize, like, okay, these meds aren't doing anything, and now I'm on 5. So why am I on them? And that's some of the feedback that I've gotten from one person in particular. He is a surgeon in New York City and had been on 5 different meds for 20 years. And after doing a course of psilocybin microdosing for 2.5 months, he was able to go off of 3 of the medications that he'd been on, because he said, he's like, these things aren't doing anything, they're making me sleepy, they make me tired. So it's just one of the stories of countless stories that have been getting in terms of people's experiences.
Tell me the use case, the ideal customer profile of someone who should consider consuming psilocybin and what they would expect from the benefits.
So again, I'm always conscientious about, should someone, or let's just say, if you're interested and you're considering something like this, I would say that, from the feedback that we have gotten in terms of these surveys, they're the only people that may want to be very conscientious about this is someone who maybe is schizophrenic, bipolar, has a serious mental illness. That's something where I would always encourage people, to make sure that they're following like a psychiatrist or a doctor's advice. But everyone else, and it's literally everyone else who has been feeling a call or a curiosity or something like that. If you do deal with chronic anxiety, if you feel like I can't get focused, if you feel like, I just need a little more inspiration or flow in my day, a little more creativity, for people that are wanting to quit smoking, quit drinking, even microdosing has shown to be effective for people that tend to like binge eat and have sugar cravings, because it changes that neural network of loops and patterns that people get into, and it begins to, again, it ignites other neural pathways. So even being at this conference called Wonderland recently in Miami, one of the presenters was the CEO of Wisana Health, who was a former hockey player. He had tons of traumatic brain injuries from fighting on the ice. And microdosing has been shown to regrow, and re-stimulate, growth in the brain. Even Mike Tyson is a big proponent of it as well. So, I mean, it is, yeah, I know why it's a Schedule 1, because, it has so many functions. So it's like, in some ways, like, pharmaceutical companies and the feds don't want people to get their hand on like a wonder, a wonder pill or a wonder medicine. So there's a lot of things that are tied up into that. But in terms of people who want to onboard themselves, it's really a very open door, and it's has tons of support for so many different issues that people encounter every day.
And just to confirm, psilocybin is mushrooms. It grows naturally. There is no human intervention. It's naturally occurring like a flower or a mushroom. Correct?
100%. Nature made it. Nature. So there's no human intervention. Exactly. Just like a flower, just like anything else that nature does so well without our intervention. Yes, that's right. It's exactly.
And then we humans said that's a drug. Correct?
Actually, yes. And when it became Schedule 1 was actually in the 70s, when I think it was like the late 60s and 70s, when the feds were rounding up, the hippies when they were protesting. So in order to curb the protesters who were protesting the Vietnam War, the thing that, officers were realizing that they were finding in these protesters' pockets were cannabis and mushrooms. And that's when they became Schedule 1, because it was a way to criminalize and heavily penalize people who were peacefully protesting. So they said, oh, these are things that these people tend to have on them. So if we make them, federally, a Schedule 1, then we're going to put them in prison and we're going to end their ability, to have these movements. That's when it started.
Wow. Tell me about the kind of content that you think would be educational for the masses, that would open the eyes of the average American to learning about the potential benefits of consuming psilocybin. What does that Instagram post, what does that YouTube video look like?
Thank you. That is also such a great question, because when I think about how I learned, one of my favorite ways actually to learn is something with those like whiteboard animations where it's animating along the way. And I find that to be personally extremely helpful, especially learning about topics where it might be very difficult to visualize what that new technology or that new information looks like. So I feel like in terms of understanding more around psilocybin, something like your whiteboard approach, while someone is explaining different qualities or capabilities or possibilities around it, I think that would be a great approach. So just short videos, just explaining, information and deepening that understanding. I think that would be very helpful.
Got it. I know there's a well-known rumor going on that high-flying tech executives in Silicon Valley and San Francisco and Austin microdose because it expands their imagination, which obviously drives growth for bottom line revenue or for their company. But I imagine that they're not going around the fields picking up mushrooms. There has to be some industrial complex to the psilocybin industry. So can you touch on that, on what's going on right now in regards to the farming of mushrooms and who's doing it and where? And obviously it's illegal federally, but it must be going on just like cannabis.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like in terms of California, that's where tons of this came from when it got into more of the mainstream culture. XYZ CEO at XYZ startup is all of a sudden like, wait, how did you do this with your profits? Or how did you do this? It's like, oh, I've been microdosing, like what? Wait, what? I want that. Give me that. So not that I am connected to the board of whoever in Silicon Valley. However, having just spent the last 5 years living in LA, like, yes, the conversations are happening and that, peer-to-peer information is being shared of how people are doing it. In terms of, the industrial complex around mushrooms, I find that fascinating because I will say, as with cannabis, it could get there for sure. Are those things happening? Everybody's going to find a way to expand on an emerging field. But yeah, I mean, your CEOs and VCs aren't just, sort of like rummaging around on Reddit or rummaging around on, some, I don't know, whatever the dark web might be now and finding this. It's like, yeah, they're putting they're saying like, hey, where did you get that? Give me that. And this is becoming, I think, just such a destigmatized, like limitless type of option. that people see what it does, and they don't care what the Fed has to say about it. They do care, though, I know, about quality. So this is one of those things, when we get information from people, like, they're starting to be more educated. So, you can do a search on the internet and it's like, oh, so this strain does this, just like cannabis. And so people are getting their hands on different types of information, and they are, they really are demanding more in terms of quality. So for those, gray area entrepreneurs that are wanting to get in there and invest and expand, of course that exists. How you get access to it. I mean, I think it's one of those things to just ask everyone, like, hey, where do I get microdoses, and start that way and see what happens.
Dude, just like how hemp is derived from cannabis and it's now legal federally under the 0.3 THC benchmark, do you think that the same thing is going to happen with psilocybin, where there's going to be like a hemp psilocybin where there's like a 0.3 benchmark for the THC of mushrooms?
We will see how granular the legislation gets, and legislation loves to get very granular on certain things. In California, they're already, in terms of the proposed legislation, there's a very specific, we'll just say, in terms of, not in terms of potency, but in terms of amount that one could carry. They were getting granular on that. In terms of potency, yes, look, we're talking about microdosing, which could be, 65, 100 milligrams versus, you're going to the moon, with 5 grams. So there's definitely we're gonna get into potency issues, because that, again, is where I do see the need for regulation and education, because if you don't know what 100 milligrams means, and then you are saying, oh, wait, is 100 milligrams, or wait, do I want 500 milligrams? Oh, maybe actually grams. So again, with all of these sort of variants in terms of dosage, that is where I do agree that regulation is super important. And again, is it the regulation? Well, it's also just a ton of education.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the daily usage of microdosing. If I were to microdose, what would I actually be doing every morning? Is it pills? Is it a coffee or tea? How do you go about doing it, and for how long?
So you could take your pick, I think, at this point, of what you want to use. Do you want a capsule? Do you want a gummy? Do you want chocolate? Do you want a tincture? There are lots of modalities that are available. Some of them may be higher quality extractions versus, something that's just like a ground up powder. It's person to person in terms of preference and, what exactly they want to see the outcome to be. So with anything, you really do need to know your source and ask tons of questions. And look, you can get on the internet and you can do tons of research. There is loads of information out there in terms of, what a certain, it's like, okay, do I want chocolate? Do I want it in gummy form? Do I want it in capsule form? There is loads of information there. So really would encourage people, if they are considering, looking at something like this, do your research. This is something that we say in cryptocurrency as well. It's like, do your own research, and that's there's less handholding here. You really need to know what you're getting into. Again, this is why I'm an education advocate. A microdose is very different than a full dose. I mean, even if you're looking at 65 to 100 milligrams, that's a very different outcome than 500 milligrams, than 5 grams, right? So, and how much difference you'll feel, that, you kind of have to play around with different things to discover what's the right dosage for you.
And how much does it cost? Tell me about the money.
So again, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in all of that. However, I would guess, like any resource in terms of scarcity or availability, depending where you are, I'm sure there's going to be a cost difference, right? So a state that's, tends to be ahead of things like California, you might see a different in price or availability versus somewhere even like New York or Austin or, Chicago. So depending where you are, I'm sure that there's an accessibility issue and going to be cost differentiation.
Mhm. You've mentioned cryptocurrencies many times on this podcast. Why? And what's the overlap between the psilocybin community and the crypto community?
Interesting that the digital mycelium, which is the blockchain, is coming up at the same time as the physical mycelium in psilocybin, because mycelium is to grow mushrooms. There's this mycelial brain, let's say, and to create a cryptocurrency, there's this mycelial blockchain, which is kind of like this brain or ledger. I find it very fascinating that both are really gaining popularity at the same time, and I know nothing is random. I happen to be in both, and I see both of them as giving, just empowerment to people, whether it's Bitcoin or pick your cryptocurrency. I love Bitcoin. It's decentralized. That's we deal with similar legislation issues in both camps. It's the feds trying to decide if we have access or not. And at the end of the day, they don't get to decide, because the more you have these open source entities, whether it's something like psilocybin, which is nature. So again, nature's not like, hey, it's only for a part of the population. No, everybody can use it. The same with something like cryptocurrency in the blockchain. It's open source. Anyone can use it. So the Fed or whoever, whichever central bank or whichever country, doesn't get to come along and decide who gets to use it. It's already there. When people say, oh, well, can this go away? No, the internet, it's the internet of money. So is the internet going away? No, it's not. So there's a lot of overlap that's there in terms of regulations, of some uncertainties, but there's also people have this knowing. They know, they want to know more about it. They can feel the energy around it. There is this energy around psychedelics, and there is this energy around cryptocurrency, and nobody can deny it.
It's interesting to think about the dichotomy of psilocybin, cryptocurrencies, the power of the people, the individual, versus what's going on a macro level, global lockdowns, the pandemic, and forced vaccinations and forced travel restrictions, and the government versus the individual. And really, it's interesting to see how these two ways are clashing when you think about it.
Look, everything is in cycles, right? If you've ever heard the book, The Fourth Turning, you know that we as the US are in a fourth turning, or a cycle of 20 years. And beyond that, if you look astrologically, and if you look at cycles of things, whether you're looking at Eastern Indian traditions in terms of yugas, of 20,000 year cycles, or if you're looking in other 5,000 year cycles, we are in a cycle, and we're in a cycle where, contrary to what it looks like, we are really going up in terms of enlightenment and ascension, but it is darkest before the dawn, right? And right now, all fiat currencies are crumbling. Either we are at the absolute disaster tipping point. 2008, we started money printing like never before, and all of these bubbles that we're seeing are bursting. So the people that were in, these cypherpunk communities, they started to realize this, and they understood, and getting together to create these currencies that would be accessible for the people, by the people, and really, run by, code, right? And so this sort of like perfect money or currency that is Bitcoin, it's this energy. It's this energy of, it's ours, but yet it's for everyone. So the central banks, being where they are and recognizing like they're completely irrelevant. We don't need a central bank to make money for us. We have cryptocurrency. We don't need the feds to tell us that nature created this sort of, I don't want to say perfect, but just like very, very well, produced substance that gives us access to more of who we are. We don't need their permission. So I think people are waking up to the fact that like, this is all smoke and mirrors. It's not random that there is a pandemic happening right now in 2020. It's not random. People have been saying it's going to happen. I mean, all you have to do is look back into, what people, certain notable personalities and public personas have been saying like, this is coming, this is on its way. It's like, yeah, it's not random. If you look at the timeline of things going on, follow the money, follow the money, right? So you look at that, you look at what happened, you compare those, sort of like timelines and charts. I mean, the picture tells it, the picture tells the story. So I'm just grateful that, we've had things like Burning Man that is sort of open source and decentralized, where, there's been a promoting of things like psychedelics, and that has seeped out into the consciousness of all the people who came in, whether that was, Elon, Sergey, I mean, look, Google two heads hired one of their, their higher ups on the playa at Burning Man, right? So when you have these sort of like very decentralized events where people from all sorts of backgrounds are coming in, getting access to this open source knowledge that's carrying out back into, their, like they would say the default world. And those waves have just been building and building and building. And so we're at this crescendo of access, and people now are going to have to take responsibility. The government isn't, they're like, oh no, we're about to lose all of our power. If everybody wakes up and pays attention to the fact that they have this new money and they don't need a bank, they don't need it's peer-to-peer, person-to-person. Oh, they don't need antidepressants. Oh no, so oh no, it's going to be really scary if you take these psychedelics. You're going to experience a ego death. It's like, oh, what's that? I mean, again, like people are waking up. Like weird. This is even though it looks dark, you turn off the media, turn it off. What does it look like? You wouldn't even know that there's a pandemic if you weren't paying attention to the news.
Wow, that was a great monologue. Seriously.
Thank you. I could really go on and on. I will just say I do my best to try to not to think of things as like more of just sort of in a coherence. I try not to be us versus them. At the end of the day, there are many that we are all humans, and we are all of one sort of mind and consciousness. We're just all on these, we're having all these different experiences. So the more we can come together and realize there's nothing to fight, we don't need the us versus them, and we come together, in this way where we can collectively improve. It doesn't mean we're all the same. It just means that we can all benefit. There's enough for all of us. We're coming up to that. Just wait for 2025. A lot of things are about to shift.
I'm really happy you brought up us versus them, because I grew up with the us versus them mentality. I served in the Israeli military, Israelis versus Palestinians, us versus them. The Holocaust and the Jews, us versus them, the other. And it's going on today, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, the other. And it seems like it's convenient for society to have an other, because it allows those to have a sense of self, and it empowers their sense of identity by labeling an other, because it gives them a sense of who they are. And you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Look, esoteric philosophy says this. That is at the heart of esoteric philosophy. The nothing defines itself with the other. And I don't want to get super esoteric here, but to your point, we know ourselves better in some ways by creating this other. So if the other is, I hesitate to go into facts versus unfacts, but it's like, oh, well, you're this and I'm this, so I know myself better by knowing what I'm not. However, what I would say is put yourself in the other place and recognize that's also another version of you. It's another version of you. It's just that doesn't happen to be the lifetime you've decided to live right now. But if you look at things in the quantum, there is no linear time. All things exist at the same time. I mean, we're fed this complete BS narrative that there's linear time. You can have any experience you want at any time. Quantum physics says all things exist right now. There's all the potential. So that unvaxxed person, that's you having a different experience. The vaxxed person, that's you having that experience. There is no us and them. It is just an other, so we can potentially understand ourselves better. And humans tend to do that by looking at what we aren't. However, if you take some psychedelics and you get out of your ego, you recognize that you are both.
Beautiful. Aya, before I let you go, I want to ask you my signature question. But before I do, tell us, how can we contact you? Where can people reach out to you?
So depending on what way people like to reach out, they could reach out to me. I'm on Instagram. You can find me at The Well-Grounded Spirit. You also could send me an email. I am sunsetlabs@protonmail.com, because we like to keep it private.
What's Proton Mail?
Proton Mail is an encrypted email service, basically created by the CERN lab in Geneva, to keep everything very private. So it's an encrypted service where, as opposed to Gmail, which they look at every single bit of your information. Your Gmail is not private. It's a free service because they get to take your information and use it. I like to use Proton Mail because no one is going through my information and taking it and using it, to sell something to me. So that is why I use Proton Mail.
Wow, I can't believe I've never heard of it. It
You
makes
have
me think
now,
of
and now
Go-Go
you
Duck.
can
Makes me think of
use it.
Go-Go Duck.
Yeah, DuckDuckGo, right?
Duck,
Yeah,
Go.
yeah. People can also find me on LinkedIn. You can find me there, Aya Allison. So depending on the modality that you like, you can pick one of those.
Fantastic. All right, so for my signature question that I ask everybody, Aya, if there was one thing you could do to improve this world, what would you do and why?
I would get rid of central banks. I would get rid of central banks. Central banks have been making the world miserable for the majority of the population. I think, pretty much since time began. And the sort of like also would be to get everybody into Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is smart money, it's sound money, and it is it's the platform that's here, sort of to give us this off ramp from the fiat system. I mean, the fiat system is driven by war, and Bitcoin is peace. So, we'll get rid of central banks. We don't need that.
All right, so let's say there's, I think, 260 countries plus on the planet. They all have a central bank. Let's say we're in a conference room right now, all 260 presidents of the central banks, and you're presenting, and you say we need to remove the central banks. What would you say to them, and what do you imagine their counter argument to be, and how would you respond to that?
So look, it's a process, right? Even when, working and doing consulting and coaching, it's micro change, right? I'm not going to sit there and just say, hey, let's, bomb the banks, let's eliminate the banks, even though that's been a policy that, central banks do. They have no problem just eliminating, your wealth, my wealth, whatever. They have no problem with that. But you say, do unto others as you would have done unto you. So, you have to implement change slowly with that, and you have to orange pill them, right? You have to orange pill.
What's that? What's orange pill?
Orange pill is that's when you get people into cryptocurrency. So there's like in the Matrix, there's the red pill, the blue pill. Well, with cryptocurrency, there's the orange pill. And so you have to present to them the information in a way that it makes sense and helps them feel safe. At the end of the day, everybody wants to feel safe and secure, and even central bankers. So again, not to have it like an us versus them, but to present that, you really have to frame it in a way where there seems to be this sense of purpose. Look, with unchecked greed, I'm not going to sit here and say I have some sort of antidote to that. Sometimes it has to, there might have to be something very severe that happens to sort of put that in check. But for the majority of people, I mean, I do believe that you can find something that it allows them to feel safe, where it's just like, okay, yes, I can move forward with this because this makes sense to me. So again, I don't want to be the person presenting it personally. I would like to orange pill the population. And the thing is, in some ways, it's like we can eliminate them because they're going to be irrelevant. Like we don't have to fight against them. We just adopt the new thing.
Who are some people that you're learning from who you think could be in that room presenting? Some thought leaders in the space.
Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor is, I can't say enough good things about Michael Saylor. He understands Bitcoin on such a level that, I mean, it's just unbelievable, his ability to present, to make it relevant, to make it philosophical. Pardon me, I'm gonna.
How do you spell Saylor?
So it's Saylor. I think you can find him on Twitter at Saylor. But Michael Saylor, he literally just has the ability to speak about Bitcoin specifically so eloquently and so passionately. I mean, he's a guy who comes from the heart. So I believe in coming from the heart. You know, I'm not here to eradicate things. I'm here to share from the heart. Because at the end of the day, like I care about humanity and I want the best for people. Michael says, as the waters rise, all the ships rise. And I very much believe that.
I've loved this conversation. I feel like it's really pushed the culture. It's really been at the forefront of what's political and what not to talk about. And we talked about it all, which I love that. So thank you so much, Aya. It's been so fun. I really enjoyed this conversation. Is there any last words you'd like to say?
Honestly, please feel free to reach out to me. Wherever you want to reach out to me, please reach out. I love connecting with people. I love educating. I love sharing knowledge. So please feel free to do that. Thank you. Thank you so much. So this is a great conversation. Happy to do this anytime.
And shout out to Upstream for connecting us.
Absolutely. That shout out to Alex. Thank you so much, Upstream. What an incredible app. Go check it out. Download it if you haven't already. You're totally missing out. FOMO in right now. That's how we met. And it's a great tool. My favorite app.
Same. All right, Aya. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you again. Have a good day.
See ya.
Bye.